He steps into his own house after fixing something that needed fixing. Hands rough. The shirt is dirty. My body is exhausted. The job is done. Before he hears hello. Before he hears thank you. Before he even sets his keys down. He hears what he forgot. And in that split second, something tightens in his chest. Not anger. Not surprising. Familiarity. Because this moment didn't just happen today. It's happened 1,000 times before. If you've ever paused before speaking. If you've ever checked her face before sharing your day. If you've ever edited your words to avoid a sigh, a look, a shift in the room. Listen closely. This isn't love. This isn't a partnership. This is conditioning. A quiet prison built over years, not by cruelty but by good intentions. And the most dangerous part? It didn't start with marriage. It started the moment you learned that being approved of felt safer than being yourself. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You don't lose yourself in one dramatic moment. There's no explosion. No door slammed. No final argument where everything breaks. You disappear quietly. It happens while you're doing everything right. While you're being responsible. While you're providing. While you're fixing what needs fixing and carrying what needs carrying. At first, it even feels like growth. You learn to be patient. You learn to be calm. You learn when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. You become the reliable one. The steady one. The man who doesn't rock the boat. And people praise you for it. She's lucky to have you. You're such a good husband. You're so easygoing. What they don't see is the cost. Because every time you choose peace over honesty, something small goes quiet inside you. Every time you swallow an opinion to avoid tension, that voice weakens. Every time you tell yourself it's not worth it, you train your nervous system to stand down. Not because you don't care, but because it feels safer not to. You stop asking yourself what you want, not all at once but gradually. You stop checking in with your own reactions. You stop trusting your instincts. You tell yourself you're being mature. That this is what commitment looks like. That real men handle things instead of talking about them. And so you keep handling it. Years pass. You're still married. Still showing up. Still doing what needs to be done. From the outside nothing looks wrong. But inside something feels thinner. The man you used to be, the one with opinions, with edges, with a sense of self that didn't require approval, he hasn't vanished. He's just been edited. Trimmed down. Softened. Filtered to fit the room. You notice it in small moments. You hesitate before speaking even when the topic matters to you. You mentally rewrite sentences before they leave your mouth. You feel a flicker of frustration or excitement, and immediately shut it down. Not because anyone told you to, but because you learned that being agreeable kept things smooth. And smooth became the goal. Over time, you stop recognizing the difference between who you are and who you perform as. Your preferences blur. Your opinions turn flexible. Your boundaries become negotiable. You don't feel angry, you feel numb. And that's the most dangerous part. Because numbness feels like stability. You tell yourself this is just adulthood. Just marriage. Just what happens when life gets serious. But here's the truth most men never hear. You didn't become calmer. You became quieter. You didn't become selfless. You became self-abandoning. And the man you lost wasn't reckless or immature. He was alive. This is how good men disappear. Not through failure but through years of trying to be everything except themselves. And once this process starts, it feels normal. Until one day you realize something unsettling. You've been present for everyone else, but absent from your own life. And that realization is where the real story begins. You don't need her to say anything. The sigh tells you everything. The pause. The look that lasts half a second too long. Your body reacts before your brain can catch up. Your chest tightens. Your stomach drops. Your shoulders subtly brace. And that's when you adjust. You soften your tone without realizing it. You rephrase the sentence mid-air. You take something real and turn it into something safer. Not because you're afraid of her, but because you've learned the cost of her disapproval. At some point, her reaction stopped being feedback and became measurement. Her mood became the scoreboard. Her expression became the verdict. When she's good, you breathe easier. You joke more. You feel like yourself again. When she's not, your nervous system goes on alert. You scan the room. You replay what you said. You search for the mistake. And the wild part? You don't remember choosing this. No one sat you down and said, your worth now depends on my approval. There was no rule book. No announcement. It happened gradually, through repetition. Every time tension followed honesty. Every time silence followed an opinion. Every time peace returned only after you adjusted. Your brain connected the dots. This works. This keeps things calm. This keeps me safe. So you adapted. And adaptation is powerful. That's how humans survive. But here's what most men don't realize. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between physical danger and emotional threat. Disapproval triggers the same survival circuitry as rejection, abandonment, or loss. So your body treats her displeasure like a storm it needs to prepare for. That's why you notice the shift before words arrive. That's why your reaction is physical, not logical. That's why you're already editing yourself before you've decided to. Over time, this rewires you. You stop expressing until you've checked the room. You stop sharing unless the weather looks clear. You stop asking, what do I feel? And start asking, how will this land? Her response becomes the filter for your reality. And without noticing, her approval replaces your own. You don't evaluate your actions based on your values anymore. You evaluate them based on her reaction. Did she smile? Did she sigh? Did she go quiet? That becomes the metric. This is why even small moments feel heavy. A raised eyebrow can ruin your evening. A quiet dinner can hijack your mood. A single look can undo an entire day of effort. And because it's subtle, you normalize it. You tell yourself you're being considerate, emotionally intelligent, a good partner. But there's a difference between empathy and self-erasure. You crossed it without realizing. And here's the question most men never stop to ask. When did her approval become more important than your self-respect? When did keeping the peace start costing you your voice? Because once her mood becomes the weather you live under, you stop living your own emotional life. You just react to hers. And that's not love. That's dependency wearing the mask of devotion. And it's the next wall in the prison you didn't know you were building. This didn't start with her. That's the part most men never hear. Before the relationship. Before the commitment. Before the marriage. It started inside your nervous system. Long before you ever spoke to a woman you cared about, your brain was already running calculations. How do I come across? What does she want? How do I fit without being rejected? And here's the truth most people miss. That instinct isn't a weakness. It's biology. For thousands of years, male survival depended on acceptance. Men who adapted, who learned to read the room, anticipate reactions, and adjust behavior, were the ones who stayed connected to the group. They were chosen, protected, allowed to belong. Men who didn't adapt, they were isolated, excluded, left behind. And in the ancient world, isolation wasn't emotional. It was fatal. So your brain learned something very early. Belonging equals safety. Disapproval equals danger. That wiring didn't ask for your consent. It didn't wait for adulthood. It was installed before you ever knew it was there. By your early 20s, your nervous system was already trained. You didn't call it fear. You called it awareness, charm, social intelligence. You learned to read microsignals, to sense shifts in tone, to adjust before rejection arrived. And most of the time it worked. You were liked, accepted, chosen. So the wiring strengthened. Then came commitment. Then came emotional investment. Then came the moment where her opinion mattered more than anyone else's. And that's when the old survival code took over, quietly. Because once her approval became important, your nervous system treated it as essential. Not emotionally essential. Biologically essential. Your body didn't experience her disappointment as a disagreement. It experienced it as threat. That's why your reactions are automatic. That's why logic comes second. That's why your body responds before your mind can intervene. Your nervous system isn't asking, is this fair? It's asking, am I safe? And safety to that ancient wiring means one thing. Do I still belong? So you adapt. You soften. You bend. You anticipate. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Here's where it gets dangerous. That same wiring that helped you survive early dating doesn't update itself for long-term intimacy. It doesn't know the difference between attraction and partnership, between approval and respect, between peace and self-erasure. It just knows patterns. And once a pattern is established, it runs on autopilot. If approval follows adjustment, the brain locks it in. If tension follows honesty, the brain flags honesty as risk. If peace returns only when you retreat, retreat becomes default. No conscious decision required. Over time, your identity starts shifting to accommodate the wiring. You become more agreeable, more careful, more controlled. You stop asking, what do I want to say? And start asking, what will keep things calm? And the most unsettling part? From the outside you look fine, responsible, reliable, emotionally mature. No one sees the internal negotiation happening every time you speak. No one sees the micro-calculations before every sentence. No one sees how often you abandon your own truth before it even reaches your mouth. Because this isn't drama. It's conditioning. And conditioning feels normal. That's why men struggle to name it. There was no explosion. No betrayal. No obvious villain. Just a slow alignment of behavior around approval. Until one day you realize something feels off. You're present, but not fully. Involved, but muted. Loved, but unseen. And you can't explain why. That's because the conflict isn't external. It's between who you are and who your nervous system learned to be. This wiring doesn't mean you're broken. It means you were shaped by forces older than language. But here's the shift most men never reach. Awareness doesn't remove wiring, but it gives you choice. Once you see the pattern, you stop confusing survival with love. You stop mistaking adaptation for devotion. You realize that safety built on self-erasure isn't safety at all. And the question changes. It's no longer how do I keep the peace? It becomes, who am I becoming to maintain it? Because the moment you see the wiring, you're no longer powerless against it. And that's where the real work begins. It doesn't start with a fight. It starts with a hesitation. A split second where your mouth opens, and nothing comes out. A moment where your body leans back instead of forward. Before a single word is spoken, your nervous system has already scanned the room. Is she tense? Is she quiet? Is this safe? That question runs silently in the background, faster than thought. And in that instant, without arguments, without drama, without permission, the first wall of the prison is built. You stop leading with your experience. Your thoughts don't come out raw anymore. They come out processed, filtered, edited for impact control. Your day becomes a softer version. Your opinions lose their edges. Not because you don't have them, but because you learned, slowly and painfully, that honesty sometimes comes with consequences. So you adapt. You tell yourself it's emotional intelligence. You call it consideration. You label it maturity. You convince yourself this is what a good man does. But what you're actually doing is shrinking to fit a space that no longer feels safe to fully occupy. At first, it feels responsible, even noble. You believe you're protecting the relationship, preserving peace, avoiding unnecessary tension. But this isn't harmony, it's self-suppression dressed up as virtue. Every time you pause instead of speak, every time you swallow a thought because the atmosphere feels off, another brick is added to the wall. Quietly, invisibly. And the man you used to be, the one who spoke freely, who led with his truth, who didn't negotiate his right to exist, slowly fades into the background. Here's the most dangerous part. There's no alarm. No warning light. You don't notice the change while it's happening. One day you realize you don't share your frustrations anymore. Another day you notice you don't talk about ideas, dreams, or opinions unless you're sure they'll be received well. You stop asking, what do I feel? And start asking, how will this land? Your internal compass is quietly replaced by her reactions. And without a single lock or chain, you're contained. When the atmosphere feels heavy, you go quiet. When tension enters the room, you retreat. You tell yourself it's patience. You tell yourself it's discipline. But discipline that requires you to disappear is not strength. It's fear pretending to be control. The peace you're buying is fragile and temporary, and the price is your identity. You're not choosing calm. You're paying for it with silence. This is why the first wall is so powerful. It doesn't look like a prison. It looks like being a good man. But over time, it grows taller, built from thousands of tiny moments where you adjusted instead of expressed, adapted instead of led. And one day you wake up inside boundaries you never consciously agreed to. Once you see this wall, you can't unsee it. Because it was never about love. It was about survival patterns running unchecked. And recognizing the first wall is the moment you stop confusing harmony with self-erasure, and start remembering who you were before you learned to disappear. Let's start with a hard truth that most men never see until it's already drained them. The approval you're chasing was never designed to last. That's not a failure on your part, it's the mechanism. One day she's warm. She smiles. She laughs. She seems close. And in that moment your chest loosens. Your shoulders drop. You think, this is it. I did it right. You replay that moment in your head because it feels like oxygen. But then, without warning, it's gone. The warmth cools. The connection fades. And that sudden absence hits harder than any argument ever could. Because uncertainty hurts more than rejection. This is where the trap tightens. Psychology calls it intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the strongest conditioning forces known to the human brain. It's the same system behind gambling addiction, slot machines, and endless scrolling. The brain doesn't get hooked on reward, it gets hooked on unpredictable reward. When approval is random, your mind becomes obsessed with earning it again. You start tweaking yourself, adjusting your tone, editing your words, apologizing early, walking carefully. And every once in a while you're rewarded. Just enough to keep you chasing. Here's what makes it brutal. There is no pattern to master. You can do everything right and still get distance. You can do nothing and sometimes get affection. So you try harder. You overanalyze. You replay conversations. You scan her mood like it's a weather report. Your nervous system stays switched on all day, every day. Every sigh feels loaded. Every pause feels dangerous. And slowly, without noticing, your reactions stop being conscious. You don't choose to suppress yourself. It happens automatically. At some point, you normalize it. You tell yourself this is marriage. This is maturity. This is love. But it's not. It's conditioning. You're being trained to associate your worth with her reactions. You become a student of her moods instead of the author of your life. Your opinions soften. Your edges round off. Your desires get delayed. And the man you once were doesn't vanish. He just goes quiet, waiting for permission to exist. This is why approval never sticks. Because it was never about connection. It was about control through unpredictability. The moment you understand this, something shifts. You stop chasing warmth that disappears. You stop performing for reactions that keep moving. You see the game for what it is. And once you see it clearly, you can't be hooked the same way again. Because approval that must be earned repeatedly is not love. It's leverage. And recognizing that is the first real crack in the prison wall. Let's start with something that should scare you, because it's already happening inside your body. Your nervous system does not understand emotional threat as just feelings. That pause. That sigh. That look she gives you when the room suddenly feels cold. Your body reads it the same way it would read physical danger. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. Adrenaline spikes. Your heart rate shifts. Your muscles brace. In that instant, your body isn't reacting to a relationship problem, it's reacting to a survival threat. And the most dangerous part? You don't even notice it anymore. Feels normal. This isn't occasional. It's daily. You walk into your home and your system goes on alert. You scan her tone before you speak. You read the room before you relax. You choose your words like you're defusing a bomb. Your body stays tense even when nothing is wrong. Over time, that constant vigilance rewires you. Blood pressure rises slowly, quietly. Sleep stops being restorative. You wake up tired even after 8 hours. Your jaw stays clenched. Your shoulders never drop. You tell yourself it's age, or work stress, or responsibility. But deep down you know the truth. Your home doesn't feel like rest. It feels like a battlefield with no visible enemy. Here's what makes it worse. Because the stress is subtle and constant, you convince yourself it's maturity. You call it being the bigger man. You call it keeping the peace. But every time you hold your tongue, every time you edit yourself mid-thought, every time you suppress your instinct just to avoid her reaction, your nervous system records it. Your body learns a brutal lesson. Silence equals safety. And safety bought with self-erasure always comes at a price. That price is physical. Chronically elevated cortisol ages you faster. It damages your heart. It weakens your immune system. It keeps your body in a low-grade emergency state year after year. Tension becomes your baseline. Fatigue becomes your personality. You don't remember what relaxed feels like, because your body hasn't felt safe in years. What should have been your sanctuary slowly turns into a pressure chamber. And the most terrifying part? There's no explosion. No dramatic breaking point. Just erosion. Quiet, invisible erosion. One dinner where you didn't speak. One night you couldn't sleep because the atmosphere felt heavy. One conversation you rehearsed in your head but never had. Over decades, those moments stack, and your body pays for every single one. This is the cost no one warns you about. Not emotional pain. Not loneliness. Physical damage. Your body suffers when your voice disappears. Recognizing this isn't weakness. It's the beginning of freedom. Because once you see what this is doing to your body, you can't unsee it. And that awareness is the first step toward reclaiming not just your voice, but your health, your vitality, and your life. The moment everything changes doesn't arrive with noise. There's no argument, no dramatic confrontation, no scene that looks powerful from the outside. In fact, it looks almost boring, ordinary. But inside you, something detonates. A realization lands so hard it rearranges the way you see yourself, your relationship, and your entire life. You finally understand this. Freedom doesn't come from leaving, and it doesn't come from fighting. It comes from one distinction that most men never learn. Doing something wrong is not the same as doing something she doesn't like. For years, those two felt identical. Her discomfort felt like proof that you failed. Her silence felt like judgment. Her disappointment felt like evidence that you weren't enough. So every time her mood shifted, you rushed to repair it. Not because you betrayed your values, but because her reaction felt dangerous. Your body treated it like a threat. And that's how the prison stayed locked, not by force but by fear. Here's the truth no one ever taught you. Her emotions are signals, not commands. Information, not instructions. Discomfort does not automatically mean wrongdoing. Sometimes it simply means preference. And preferences are not laws. They are not moral truths. They are not measurements of your worth. But you've been treating them like all three for years, and it's been costing you your identity. The shift begins the moment you stop asking, "Did I upset her?" and start asking, "Did I violate my values?" Those questions lead to two very different lives. One keeps you small, reactive, and exhausted. The other makes you grounded, solid, calm. When you make that distinction, something changes immediately. You stop collapsing inside every time she reacts. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop managing emotions that were never yours to carry. And no, this doesn't turn you cold. It doesn't make you cruel or selfish. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop disappearing. You become a man who can stand inside discomfort without folding. A man who can let tension exist without panicking. That stability is what's been missing all along. Here's the part most men don't expect. When you stop trying to escape silence, silence loses its power. When you stop treating disapproval like danger, it stops controlling you. The storm only rules you when you believe you're responsible for the weather. The moment you stop fixing, chasing, and shrinking, the prison cracks open. There may be friction at first. Confusion. Resistance. Because she's used to the version of you that folded. A solid man is unfamiliar territory. But unfamiliar doesn't mean unsafe. It means real. This is the moment everything changes. Not when she changes. Not when the relationship magically improves. But when you take your worth back from her reactions. And once you feel that shift, even once, you can never unsee it. You're not broken. You're not weak. And you're definitely not selfish. You're a man who's been running ancient survival wiring inside a modern relationship, and that mismatch has been draining you for years. The version of you that had opinions, edges, and a voice didn't disappear. He was silenced to keep the peace. And silence isn't who you are. It's just a habit you learned. And habits can be unlearned. Freedom doesn't come from walking away. It comes from taking your worth back, slowly, calmly, one unedited sentence at a time. From choosing self-respect without turning it into a fight. From standing solid instead of shrinking. If this video put words to something you felt but never said, hit like so it reaches other men who need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more honest conversations about masculinity, relationships, and reclaiming your identity. And comment below, what part of this hit you the hardest? Because the moment you stop disappearing, everything changes.